Imagine setting out to visit every country on Earth, not over a lifetime, but in record breaking time. Michael Zervos did exactly that. The filmmaker and adventurer set 2 Guinness World Records as the fastest person to visit every sovereign nation, traveling to 195 countries in just 499 days. Beginning January 17th, 2024, Michael navigated more than 230 flights, 80 visas, and intense continuous travel to accomplish something only a handful of people have ever even attempted. But Michael's journey wasn't just about breaking records or collecting passport stamps. Through his global documentary endeavor called Project Cosmos, he asked people in every country the same simple question, one that led to surprisingly powerful answers about life, joy, and what matters most. I can't wait to hear the details of Michael's adventure, and it's an honor to have him on the show. Welcome, Michael, and thanks for joining us on Life Excellence.
Brian, I am thrilled to be here, and that was one of the best introductions I've had. You must have been doing this for a while now, I could tell.
Well, that's nice of you to say. You're very kind. Michael, you're a filmmaker by profession. Tell us a little bit about your background and then how your passion for shooting movies sparked the idea to travel to every country in the world.
Of course. Yeah, you never know the curveballs that life is going to throw at you, and you never know exactly the track that it has set out for you, and how things that in your childhood, in your career, will kind of echo into the future and influence the things to come. And my journey into filmmaking probably started, like many other people, was through my love of storytelling, but particularly I loved filmmaking because it combines so many other art forms into one art. Because I love so much of it, I didn't want to have to pick one, so I just got the one that has it all. You know, it's literature, it's photography, costume design, production design, dancing, choreography. I mean, the works, theater. So that's kind of how I ended up picking it. And I was always a lover of films. I remember as a boy, I'd sit next to my grandfather at the basically his old lazy boy, and I would watch Casablanca over and over again. Still my favorite movie to this day. And I can picture myself actually like reading the lines. Oh, just as the movie was going, I could probably turn it on a mute and I would remember all the lines right now. So that was where my love of filmmaking began. And I never really realized that it would become a career until maybe 15 or 16, when I started taking classes in high school and I loved it. I chickened out in college and I first went to business school, and then I decided to go back to film school. And I've been doing it now for about 15 years as a filmmaker, a director, and a producer in both feature films and commercials. And to answer the last part of your question, how did it influence me in the journey to come? I suppose as a storyteller at heart, I always have a curiosity about people and places in particular. That comes maybe from my love of traveling. And so this project, it was personal. It was born out of something sort of deeply ingrained in me, and things that happened to me kind of birthed out of a depression that I had for a long time. Hence the happiness aspect, but also the storytelling aspect and the travel aspect kind of all came together in a symphony of themes around 2023, the end of when I started to plan for the journey.
So you were inspired to explore the subject of happiness from a global perspective. What was the question that you came up with to ask everyone as you met and traveled around the world? And as you were thinking about that as a filmmaker, how did you imagine those stories would eventually be shared?
It took a while for me to come to precisely the question that I eventually asked. There were a bunch of different iterations that I tested, and I wasn't getting exactly the kinds of responses that I thought would be compelling enough to put to camera. Either the answers were too philosophical and they would be difficult to translate. They'd be too esoteric for just anybody to answer, or sometimes they were just too general. Like they were almost like survey questions. Like, what makes you happy? It's like family, friends, money, yada, yada. I don't have to be there to do that. There's many other organizations that could just send you an email for that. But I stumbled upon this question when I was trying to figure out what would get a story out of people. Because, people may not be philosophers, and maybe they aren't exactly great storytellers, but they have an interest in themselves. For some, for almost everybody, they have some sense of ego, and they know about themselves and how perhaps to tell that story. So the question that I asked to everybody that I met in every country in the world was, what is the happiest moment of your life?
That's a great question. And then you decided at some point, so you had this great question, and I wonder how you went through those iterations, or whether that was you doing it, or you were sort of bouncing it off of people. But at some point you arrived at this question, and then you decided you not only wanted to gather stories about happiness, but also to attempt breaking the world record by visiting every country in the world faster than any person in history. Those are two very different things. And at the time, that record was 554 days. How did your thinking evolve from creating these stories, from gathering this information about happiness, to breaking the world record?
Yeah, I think that it's a very astute observation. And if you think about it just for more than a couple seconds, you realize, wow, in order to find people, in order to ask this question, you probably shouldn't be speed running the world. And they're kind of antithetical goals. And the inspiration for both of these came in two different chunks. One of those was, I suppose, the personal journey from sort of the start of my career into sort of the inky blackness of depression, the sort of the darkest period of my life during 2021. And I had a lot of suicidal thoughts. I endeavored to kill myself. And I think when I got out of the other side of that, I became obsessed with this idea of happiness. Maybe not really, I wasn't really trying to find myself. I was actually just curious about happiness as it relates to other people. And eventually I thought to myself that maybe through stories, I could probably broaden the definition of happiness and provide a panoply of stories that might be able to shatter very narrow definitions, whether it comes from the West or the East, or in the case that I ended up exploring. I think that there are an infinite kind of happiness. It's almost like a color with infinite shades, no one truer than the other. And so you have that aspect of it where I wanted to ask this question to just it was kind of sitting in a box, but I didn't really have exactly where I wanted to use that, whether I was just going to do a documentary in the States or whatever. It was just sitting there and I was ruminating on it. On the other side of it, I remember reading about an adventure of sorts from Brazil. Brazilians are prolific travelers for some reason or another. And I learned about this one gentleman who claimed he had gone to every country in the world, kind of by accident. And I thought to myself, well, I wonder if I could do that. I kept on thinking about that late into the night. I wonder if I can do it. How would I do it? What kind of visas would I need? How much money would it cost? Is it even possible to go to every country in the world right now? I mean, at the time, we were just emerging from COVID. So it became a process of figuring out, could it be possible? And there was a critical juncture which I decided, yes, it is possible. And I would find the sponsors to do it. But every good story has a plot, but also a theme. The plot was man goes to every country in the world. That's kind of the thrill seeker in me. The theme, which I had set to the side, was the happiness aspect. You put them both together, suddenly you have a project that has both a plot, a story that has a plot, and it has a theme, happiness.
Well, I love that. And that really differentiates you from other people who have traveled to every country in the world. We actually, one of my earliest interviews on the show was a woman named Cassie DePeckel, and she was the first documented person to travel to every sovereign nation in the world. And lots of fascinating stories around, as you know, just the travel, the logistics, getting from place to place, and certainly interactions with people. But I'm guessing in almost every instance, the focus of people who want to travel to every country in the world, doing it quickly, it's really this checklist of sort of getting from place to place to place to place to place to place, without this other monumental project that you had of asking people about the happiest moment in their life. The planning the adventure alone was a huge project, 17 months of nonstop travel. And you had to plan the logistics of not only getting to every sovereign nation, but obviously doing it efficiently. And then there's the documentation that Guinness would need in order to certify the feat as a world record. Walk us through what was involved. And again, by the way, this is all before you even get on the plane to go to the first country. Walk us through what was involved in the planning of the trip, because that had to be an amazing undertaking.
Yeah, I think I leveraged a lot of my history as a filmmaker in order to make this thing happen. In fact, I used a lot of the skill sets that I would use in order to produce a film, kind of viewing it as a pre-production, production, and then post-production. And in pre-production and film, the better you plan, let's say 90 to 95%, you anticipate what's going to happen. And the 10 to 5% that doesn't, you have enough experience in order to overcome those things. And that's actually what makes it very exciting for some filmmakers on set. We want to mitigate the risks, but we love when an actor does something amazing on camera that you didn't anticipate. That's when the material really comes alive. And that happened very frequently on while I was traveling. I mean, beforehand, when I was researching countries that I needed to go to, I mean, we had countries that were emerging from COVID. There were countries that had travel bans on Americans. There were countries that had one way in and one way out. Either it was land or it was their national airline. Suddenly, their flights disappeared just like that. The flight goes under. The company goes under. You have embassies that are no longer operational, like Venezuela, in the United States, natural disasters, wars, the list goes on. Those are things that I knew beforehand, and things just happened as I was traveling that I had to adapt to. But I think one other thing that I learned from being a filmmaker is that you really want to find and identify partners, creatives, people who can fill your deficits. And for me, I can be a pretty good planner, and I'm a creative person, but I knew that I wouldn't be able to do it alone in the planning process and some of the execution. And so I identified key partners while I was planning, such as an adventure tourism company called Untamed Borders. They helped me with some of the visas and the actual tours on the ground with translations in some hard to get into countries. Then you've got a company like iVisa, which was critical to my mission because they were collecting visas for me even before I landed into the countries. I mean, I had probably 20 to 30 visas in my passport. I had two U.S. passports, and I got my Greek passport through. I needed to renew it at the time in Greece. So I had two U.S. passports. I was mailing out one after the other, sending them to embassies, whether it's in D.C., New York, or actually visiting Chicago. So we collected them even beforehand. And then there were plenty of others. There was Genki, the health insurance company. There were several other awesome clothiers and stuff like that. But then there was the aspect of actually figuring out the route. And that really came out of the function of adjacent countries. You're wanting to go from country to country in the most efficient way, because of course I was on a budget. And then the other thing is that you wanted to make sure that you were going in the order of visa expiration. So a lot of West African countries, Central African countries have visas that are very difficult to get very difficult to get to, like actually travel wise too. But we would get, let's say, 10 visas and they'd be expiring maybe 30, 45, or 60 days from the moment that you got it in your passport. So we needed to kind of back end the planning and make sure that we were hitting each one of those marks in the order that we anticipated, and before they actually expired. Now, after we got through most of Africa, things got a whole lot easier with visas on arrival, electronic visas, and all that. So that's when iVisa came in, and that allowed me to free up my route a little bit more. But I mean, then you have airlines, hotels, and I haven't even touched upon actually reaching out to people, contacts throughout the world, which I used entirely social media and a network of people that just kept on growing and growing and growing, whether it was followers or messaging people on socials or people hearing about my journey. That was the entire other side of it, actually documenting my experiences there and interviewing people while I was there. So, I mean, I could touch upon a lot of different aspects of the planning, but that's kind of like an overview of the logistics side, and then also the documentation side.
Well, it's mind-boggling just as you explain it, and you've really probably just scratched the surface of the explanation. Like you said, you could go into such great detail. And as I was thinking about this, so I read that there are only about 600 people that have ever been to every country in the world. And as I was preparing for this show, I thought, I bet there would be a whole lot more except for two things: time and money. And as you were explaining the planning process, I realized that there are actually three things, because that planning is incredibly detailed. It's a puzzle that has to fit together as you were explaining it, with time and when you have to be certain places. And so probably, I'm guessing in the absence of that, there would be this natural sequence of countries to visit. But with the visa expirations, you were probably hopping around a little bit, weren't you? Just because of the need to travel to a country within a certain period of time?
Yeah, I think, well, touching upon your observation about time and money, I think that those are two large barricades to maybe visiting every country in the world. I think most people who you talk to probably don't endeavor to go to every country. Maybe they just want to go to, a quarter of them, or the ones that they've heard of. I think the other big factor is not necessarily the logistical aspect. I mean, remember, I did it in a certain amount of time, and most of those 600 to 700 people, they did it over the course of their lifetime. So there was probably less planning involved. Maybe they'd hit just a small region, and it would be a lot easier than doing the whole kit and caboodle, in a year and a half. I think willpower is one of the things that prevents people from doing 600 to 700, or being among the 600 to 700 people who have been to 195, because not only is it a lot of them difficult to get to, not everybody really cares to be a completionist and visit very, very small islands in the middle of nowhere, or maybe countries that might be a bit more quote unquote dangerous. It takes a certain amount of fortitude and willingness to do it. But to answer that second part there, I guess it's amazing to me still that things worked out the way they did. I mean, if I could tell you right now, there were so many bizarre coincidences, strange things that allowed me to get into certain countries either in the nick of time, or to get in for a day or two, just enough for me to get the interviews and to leave. I mean, I was deported from a country, Nicaragua, but I got the evidence I needed, and people sent me the happiness stories because they knew that I was kicked out of their country. There was North Korea that was open for a 2-week window, And I just flew from Monaco all the way to North China, and we drove across by bus. And just a week after that, they closed down the country for tourism, and it has not been open since. So there are aspects where, I mean, things could have gone remarkably different, and I may not have broken the record, but most of the other stuff, based off the planning that I did, going around West Africa into Central and down around to the other side, to Southern and Eastern. I mean, there were delayed flights, there were some canceled flights, but amazingly, I stayed on track through most of my journey, and I hit my mark, my planned mark, actually under my planned mark at 499 days. So there wasn't a ton of bouncing around to different continents or vastly different regions. It really was adjacent countries for the lion's share of the countries that I visited. And it really, I can't stress enough, it could have gone so very different in the Pacific, where there's only one flight, one in, one out. There could have been borders closed, land borders that could have been turned away, and it would have it would have become a debacle.
Sure. And in some of those instances, you could have been delayed for days or even weeks. You talked about airlines closing down, or even there are a variety of situations that could have caused delays. And it seems like just about everything fell into place for you. Michael, what did a typical day look like in terms of travel, accommodations, food, and your interactions with people? I know you had a lot of that planned out, but what did those 499 days look like?
So I had a couple rules for myself going into this trip, and one of those things was always to enter a country without expectations. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't prepare in order to get into them, but once I was through the door, I didn't read a ton about the countries, and I didn't try to accumulate all this knowledge before I entered, because I wanted to retain a certain amount of childlike wonderment. I wanted to go in with a fresh vantage point, with as little bias as possible, and to allow the people whom I met to color the country for me. And that is, I think, I was happy I did that. There were certainly some cons to it, but I think more often than not, it really, really paid off in dividends, because expectations are disappointment in many, many, many cases. And because I would go into a lot of countries not knowing exactly what I was going to get myself into, suddenly I was floored by little discoveries, small things that I would find around certain corners. The most unlikely of countries would suddenly become countries I can't wait to go back to. So this was just a beautiful part of the trip that became really the happiest period of my life and brought me back to my childhood, and one of the reasons why I got into filmmaking to begin with. But the days themselves were as different as the stars in the sky. I mean, I had to get into them. I had to eat. I had to sleep. So I had, certain touch points here. I knew the hotel that I would stay at. I knew about certain maybe landmarks that I would want to see or I would want to film. But if I didn't get to, and of course, I had people in just about every country that I would go to. But if I didn't see some of the things that maybe I wanted to see, it was okay, because I would probably be doing something that was equally as important or interesting. And at the end of the day, it was always about people. So if I had to prioritize something, the people always won out. So if I'd stay a half a day, a full day with someone, rather than seeing a monument, a memorial, a landmark, that's what I'm going to do.
Well, you could only do so much, right? You have a limited time. And you mentioned that you had people in every country. Was that prearranged? And maybe forgive me if you touched on it as you were talking about the preparation, but was there a support structure for having people on the ground in each country that you visited, so that you didn't have to wonder who it was that you were speaking with or who it was that you were connecting with? Including translators, because that I'm sure was an issue in most countries.
Yeah, I still contend to this day that English is it's the best language to know if you're trying to do what I did. It was certainly the most useful, and then probably next to that is Spanish. But frankly, I maybe it might be a mantra at this point, but I say this so often: people make the place, and I think when you have the right people, you will find the best of the country. You will discover the country in a way that you really just can't do on your own. So largely, it was making sure that I had people, sometimes more than one or two or three. I had, sometimes I had to go and meet several people over the course of the 2, 3, 4 days, that I was there. But I made certain that I had one. And I'll tell you what, Brian, the people that I met to this day, I am in touch with nearly all of them. I could text them and ask them what's up, how's it going, and it would be like I was there now, just like a year and a half, 2 years ago. They were some of the most friendly, generous of spirit and time and money and resources that you could possibly imagine. And I couldn't have expected this level of generosity for a perfect stranger. I cannot be more thankful to those whom I met, and they really made the trip possible.
To what do you attribute that? So you experience that over and over and over again.
Hmm.
And what conclusions have you drawn about maybe about people or about generosity, wanting to help you in your endeavor?
I think that when you deal with people face to face, individual to individual, you can see the very best in people. When you pull out and you look at people like stats and you look at them in groups, you can often get the sense that the world is a cold and a distant place. But as soon as you make an effort to reach one person and to show sincerity and empathy and curiosity and a willingness to meet them and to understand them, the doors open up. And I think maybe the stated mission of my project made people immediately receptive to this. I mean, there are many countries that I visited where they don't often get tourists. I mean, it just doesn't happen that often. There may be diplomats, maybe business people now and again, but it's an unusual stated goal. And then on top of that, I'm trying to go to every country in the world. And after a while, the first 10, 15, 20 countries, I'm like, yeah, I'm only on my 10th country. And they're like, big whoop. Like, that's not that impressive. But suddenly I'm at like 100, 150 countries. They're just like, this is crazy. I mean, maybe they just wanted to meet me out of curiosity. What kind of nut job would do this? But that happiness aspect really, I think, pulled on a lot of heartstrings, and it made people curious about what I knew about it and wanted to interrogate me on their end. But they also wanted to speak about their own happiness too. And maybe on top of it all, there's a lot of national pride, so a lot of small countries just they want to be understood and portrayed in a way that maybe the media doesn't portray them or wouldn't portray them. So there's a lot of those elements that are going. I think that were going for me.
Yeah, there's really a lot packed into that. I was thinking curiosity too, not who's this crazy guy, but just curiosity about having an American in the country, which in a lot of countries that's unusual, or a foreigner at all. So that curiosity, and I'd like to think that. That the support that you received is really it speaks volumes about humanity when we get right down to a person to person level, and I know you found, and I've certainly found that people are people are people, and regardless of government policy or what's going on in the world, that we all really want most, if not all, of the same things at the core.
Yeah, yeah. There were, when I started to collect a lot of these stories, there was a paradox that happened. There was the fact is that yes, a lot of people want the same things when you distill them, perhaps in themes and topics and groups and all that. And on the other side, people want to be viewed as special, unique, individual. They want to they have their own texture and color to many of these stories, and it made it very difficult for me, as I started to, let's say, write the book that I'm currently writing, to chapterize them. My publisher, my editor, was saying, "Oh, we got to divide these in some way." I was kept on hemming and hawing. How do I divide these? How do I put them into boxes? But naturally, some categories did occur, and I think that maybe speaks to that paradox that we are all the same and we are all different, and it depends on what kind of lens you use to view those people. And sometimes we use the wrong lens when we should be using, we should be looking at somebody as a different human being and not part of the monolith and the sort of human race. And then other times we should be looking at them as a relatable human being, as a person, as a person, as a person, as a person. So we can often misappropriate the tools in which we interact with people in that way.
I love the conversation about interactions with people that you've bumped into, and I have lots of questions about that. I want to just to make sure I ask it back up to one more logistics question, and then we'll get into the people interactions, which is far more interesting, far more important. But one of the things that I thought of in anticipation of our conversation is, and you touched on it, the danger aspect, or countries that are closed, or countries that are risky to travel to. And I did a little bit of research and learned that and these are current numbers, but the U.S. State Department currently lists 21 countries and territories under a level 4 do not travel advisory. And I'm sure you know what that is. And that's the highest risk category due to threats like armed conflict, terrorism, kidnapping, or civil unrest. So the State Department is really saying, do not travel to these countries. Now, granted, your travel was a while ago, certainly prior to the current conflict in the Middle East. But interestingly, most of those 21 countries, including countries like Afghanistan, North Korea, which you mentioned, Somalia, and Sudan, have been on that list for years. And for level 4 countries, just for people most people I'm sure aren't familiar with that specific categorization, but the State Department indicates these locations are extremely dangerous and travelers face life-threatening risks. That's probably, you mentioned that a lot of people don't want to go to all the countries. I suspect that's one of the reasons that people don't want to go to certain countries like Somalia and Sudan and North Korea, even if they could get into North Korea. Michael, how concerned were you about traveling to countries like that with a level 4 advisory? And I don't know if you looked at that criteria specifically. And then I wonder what your actual experience was once you were there in those countries.
Yes, this is it. It's a multifaceted question, and I think that it concerned me. Certainly, it concerned me. It concerned my mother a whole lot more, who probably memorized that level 4 list like the back of her hand. But many countries are on there. Countries are on there for different reasons. Level 3, level 4 countries. Sometimes those are political circumstances. Sometimes, and I mean, sort of their relationship with the U.S., and that may be why they issue it. There are some countries that wouldn't mind having a U.S. prisoner in order to bargain for. this has happened before. There are other countries that are in a state of instability, and they have been for a long time. Their governments are not stable. They have not been there for a while. There has been a coup lately, and there's a lack of law and order. Just walking across town might be just a little bit more tricky. It might draw a little bit more attention, and of course, in certain countries, you're going to stand out more than others. So. To me, the ones that I was a bit more nervous about were the countries that didn't have as much law and order, that didn't have a stable government, that didn't have police that were ready and willing to help strangers, and also, of course, countries where you stand out quite a bit more. But the many countries that we would consider to be extremely dangerous or persona non grata, like let's say North Korea, or at the time, I should say Iran, those were countries that were very, very stable, and there was a lot of law and order. And if you follow those rules, you're often going to be just fine. And then there are other countries on the other side of the spectrum, such as, you mentioned Somalia. There was, countries a bit more like Libya, the Congo, Liberia. I spent time in jail in Liberia, much due to arbitrary rules, arbitrary laws that were enforced upon me and not other people. So, those are things that I had to take into consideration, and I had to weigh those. I am a risk tolerant person. That might be putting it lightly, but that's how I would call myself. And so I knew I was quick on my feet in a number of different ways. And I had really, really good people to guide me through them. I often call myself, we call it in the industry, it's like ethnically ambiguous. We use that word to describe casting. So I can often, depending on the levels of my exposure to the sun, I could kind of blend into different countries. And if I change my costume and all that, and a lot of people would give me sort of their local clothing, people would speak their own native tongue to me. And until I opened my stupid mouth, they wouldn't know I was a foreigner. So maybe that I had that going for me too.
Was that something that you were doing intentionally, the dress? I find that, I can see where, just looking at you and your hair, and I know you're of Greek heritage, and so maybe you can play, you don't stand out as much as maybe I would, or a blonde young white woman, for example. But the clothing specifically, were you using that to help facilitate blending in?
Yes, there were some times where this was an intentional sort of, I should just say, safety measure, just as a way not to stand out nearly as much. That was suggested by my guide. So because I remember I had an adventure tourism company, it is called Untamed Borders. And, sometimes they'd advise, it might be good for you to wear some traditional clothing. And sometimes I found I found a lot of it like the sort of thob garments. They look like kind of like a dress that a man would wear across the Middle East into Pakistan and Afghanistan. They were quite comfortable, and there's very good practical reasons why you would want to wear it too, because it was so hot there. So there's that. But I think that, yes, there were levels that I just wanted to blend in a little bit more. I wanted people to also see that I was trying to make an effort to respect and appreciate the culture. And so I think it was a mixture of both.
Did you ever feel like you were in imminent danger, or that your life was at risk?
Well, not very often. There were a couple of circumstances where
so that sounds like a yes.
Yeah. Look, it happened in a few circumstances. I think probably the most dangerous time on the trip when I was attacked by wild dogs in Fiji. That wasn't so good. So it wasn't human. But there were other times where I had maybe some run-ins with the law in the DRC, Liberia, where there were some fleeting worries of something worse than just a slap on the wrist. But I spent the night in jail in Liberia. I memorized my ambassador's number, so that was helpful to get out of that situation. And then in the Congo is a different story. But I don't often talk about these bad situations because they didn't happen that often. And also, my first impressions of a country are just that, they're first impressions. And you can be in the wrong place at the wrong time in many different places. I live in Detroit right now. There are certain neighborhoods I just probably wouldn't walk on the street.
Sure. Yeah, and I don't want to make too much of it, but it definitely, I think, as people think about traveling to every country in the world, and again, this is a particularly volatile time, I think, in world history. We'll reflect back on just how volatile it was, but that's people are concerned about getting on planes and at some points and traveling domestically. Certainly traveling internationally brings just another some level of risk that isn't present staying around your house. So I think it's worth talking about. But the real reason why wasn't to get into danger or to be risk tolerant. That's an interesting term. I like that. It was to collect and eventually share stories about human happiness and to have those personal interactions with people around the world and finding out about their happiest moment in life. Michael, tell us about a couple people you met, and we could talk for hours, and you have hundreds and maybe even thousands of stories. And we don't have time, obviously, to talk about all of them. We'll look for your book and we'll look forward to reading about many of them. But for now, tell us about a couple people you met who profoundly impacted you.
Well, Brian, I like to play a game with people when they ask me this question, and I'll have you play the game with me. I want you to name a country, any country in the world, and I will tell you a story that I got from that country, because there are so many that I could linger upon. But in this way, maybe I can sort of pick one that doesn't immediately come to mind.
Haiti.
Oh, this is a really good choice. I'm very glad you picked this one, because Haiti is a country, as many people know, this is one of those countries that is level 4 travel advisory. There has been instability in this country for so long. And the tragedy and suffering that has existed in this country is profound. Going into this country was a bit risky, because there was a lot of reports, or at least I should say some reports, of both tourists and Haitians being kidnapped, usually blackmail for money and all this. So going into the country, there was a little bit of that sort of spidey sense in the back of my head. Like, I need to be a little bit more aware. I'm going to a country where I'm going to look different. I went into a city called, I did not go into Port-au-Prince, the capital, which is unfortunately sort of taken over by a lot of gangs. As soon as you fly into the airport, you'll be recognized by some people. But I went to a smaller city in the north of the island called Happiest. And I flew in from the Bahamas, and immediately people were just stunned to see me. I would be walking down the street, people were like, "Why are you here?" I mean, really, it was just, they were speechless. And I ended up going to an English as a second language class. Now, French is spoken in Haiti. Not many people speak English, and if they do, it's kind of a broken English. And my guide there was a man named Curlin, and he is one of the most famous English as a second language teachers in all the world. A fantastic guy, uh, remarkable in so many different ways. He brought me to this ESL sort of event, and it was a Toastmasters event, Toastmasters International. Everybody spoke in English at this event. And I got to interview dozens of the attendees at this event. They were in line after the event because they, A, wanted to test their English, and B, they had remarkable stories to tell. I mean, you had people who would talk about religious experiences that they would have when they found out their purpose in life. You had others who would speak about the moment that they received a gift, just a small little gift. One man, his name was Tony, he received a little bicycle. It was a blue bicycle from his father when he was young. That was the happiest moment of his life. His father surprised him. And the list goes on. People first learning how to speak English, being able to have a conversation, learning that they could actually earn money by teaching English. That was another happiest moment in Haiti. And the resilience of these kids, some of them were really kids. I mean, they were like less than 18 years old, and some of them were older. The optimism, the resilience, and the willingness to share of themselves and to show another side of Haiti, it left me speechless. You will not hear a lot of people say this, but I cannot wait to go back. There are people waiting in that country to see me, and I for them.
I love that. That's a great story. And I've actually been to Haiti several times. My heart breaks for what's happening there. And I've spent a lot of time in Port-au-Prince. And unfortunately, like you said, it's just not, it's not a great place to be right now. Let's try one more, Finland.
Okay. This is another interesting one you picked because Finland is often cited as one of the happiest countries in the world.
That's why I brought that one up.
There you are. There you
no
are.
Coincidence.
Yes. Okay. So Finns are they're a tricky bunch because it's a small country. They're a bit shy, or I should say, maybe a bit stoic, almost stereotypically so. It's kind of comical in the way that they are so terse with their words, Spartan with their words. And to get stories out of them, it might be a couple of sentences. So it was a bit difficult to get full-blown sentences and then to get those on camera. One of the beautiful stories that I got when I was in Finland was Amy. She is a police officer in Finland, in Helsinki. And she met me in a subway station, the very clean and easy subway station that you can get to multiple different parts of the metro area. And she told me a story about the happiest moment of her life, which was a surprise visit from her doctors when she was in the hospital. You see, she was battling cancer for a year, almost 2 years. And the visit was totally by surprise. They came into her room and they had strawberries with cream on a plate. And I think it was her birthday. And they said, "We have a surprise for you. Your results came back negative. We think that the treatment has worked. You have officially beaten cancer and you're free to go." And that was the happiest moment of her life.
Yeah, I would think that would be a pretty happy moment for anybody. And I appreciate you sharing that. Like I said, we could go through all 195 countries, and I know you have amazing stories in each one of them. Michael, having experienced literally every country and culture that exists in the world, especially in such a compressed period of time, I'm sure you saw patterns about humanity. What did you learn about the things people hope for, both for themselves and for others? Can you draw generalizations or conclusions around the hope that people have?
So the book that I'm writing right now sort of categorizes, I would say, in a somewhat arbitrary way, the kinds of stories that I heard. There are chapters. The chapters are basically textures of the emotional states of happiness. And I say emotional states of happiness is that, I said earlier in the conversation that you can say happiness is like the color blue, but you can also say that it's like an infinite shades of blue, where none of those are the truest forms of happiness. So it turns out that the different kinds of happiness that people experience are often sort of a composition, a curation of memory. And it is an act of storytelling. It is an act of self-authorship. And that is kind of at the heart of my book, that through self-authorship, day by day, week by week, month by month, and year by year, we can re-examine our lives, and we can re-examine those same moments that we experience and edit them, almost like one would be editing a movie, in order to create a new story, to create a good from a bad, to create peace from misery. And so often people do this without even realizing. And because people are storytellers, storytelling can be practiced because we're all storytellers. We can hone our skill. We can become more generous. We can become more precise. We can become more honest. And through that act of storytelling, we have a certain amount of power, maybe not to eliminate or dissolve externalities in the world, but in order to shape those memories and create new meaning out of those things that happened. And that can create or recompose your past. It can make you then see your present in different ways, and it can project a new you into the future. And so the reason why I bring this up is because we are all innate storytellers, and sometimes we don't know it. And when we harness those abilities to be maybe better storytellers, or to perhaps notice that we are able to self-author, we have a lot more power than we give ourselves credit for. And suffering can turn into hope, sadness, frustration, bitterness, loss can suddenly turn into harmony, bliss, joy, and ecstasy. And so this is maybe at the heart of my book, and something that I notice that people do. They don't always articulate it or are conscious of this.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the idea that we don't always we can't always control our circumstances, but we always have control over how we react to our circumstances.
Precisely.
And the storytelling, I would love to have you on the show again and just talk about storytelling, because it's not unrelated to what we're talking about, obviously, but we could go down a rabbit hole on storytelling and talk for hours. And I'd love to do that. Michael, it's hard to go through something. I think it's impossible to go through something like what you've been through, traveling around the world to every sovereign nation, and to come back and be the same person. Obviously, you are far from the same person you were when you left Detroit to start that journey. How has the experience changed you as you reflect back on it?
In many ways, I know that it has changed me. And in many ways, I think that I will be able to reflect upon those when I have more distance from the experience. On the one hand, I do know some ways that it did change me. For instance, people often ask me, what is the happiest moment of your life? They ask me. And I experienced the happiest moment of my life while traveling throughout the trip. I know I cheat a bit with the definition of moment, but it is an indefinite. It is sort of it's a definite moment in the dictionary, but there's no precise amount of time in which a moment is called. So I never really defined what a moment is for people. But for me, it was about 3 months into my journey when I was in Ghana, and I realized I had been waking up every single day with a smile on my face. I was not just waking up and getting out of bed. I was leaping out of bed like a kid again. And it reminded me why I got into filmmaking to begin with. I felt both purpose and fulfillment and also a day by day presence of being. And all of this became perhaps what has been called ikigai, this sort of um, uh, harmony of many different, purpose and fulfillment, and being good at something, and also being happy in the day to day and present. And all these things kind of came together and continued over the rest of the journey. That's probably what animated me day by day to continue to do what I was doing. That's why I had the energy to do it. And for me, I pushed myself to the boundaries, and I pushed myself to find a breaking point. And it turns out I couldn't find it within myself, at least on not this journey, because the fire within me that I was experiencing, it propelled me forward. And that gives you strength unlike anything that I probably could have recited before.
I love that you were able to have that experience as you were helping people to recall the happiest moments in their lives. That makes me happy for you and happy for everybody you touched as well. Michael, as you know, our show is called Life Excellence. And after traveling to every country in the world and hearing people share the happiest moments of their lives, I'm curious, what does excellence mean to you?
For me, I think this is a very specific answer that may or may not relate to this trip in and of itself. But for a purpose-driven individual like me, who from a very early age knew what he wanted to do, I was always, I found that to be a prison for me, both a blessing and a curse. It's a double-edged sword, because you know what you want to do, and whenever you don't do it, it pains you. I know a lot of people who don't know what they want to be or do or achieve, but they don't feel the pain of not being able to do it. Maybe they feel like something is missing. But for me, what I ended up doing was I conflated that doing, this occupation of being a filmmaker, with who I am. I mistook the who for the what. I'm not just a director. I'm Michael. I'm a who too. And I think for me, being excellent is breaking free from a very limited understanding of what you are, and being fluid in who you can be and who you are. You are a friend, a family member. You are a lover. You are a father. You are a son, a daughter, a mother, and being able to do all of these things and being free from the constricting aspect of whether it's your career or whether it's, being just the breadwinner or just a mother. You can be many, many, many things. Embracing all of those things and becoming Michael or becoming XYZ, I think that's excellent. I think it gives you hope. It gives you power. It gives you compassion and forgiveness towards yourself. And maybe it was the central lesson that I needed to learn for many, many years, and I didn't. And I feel so much better about myself than I ever did.
I'm happy for that for you, and I appreciate you sharing that. You've mentioned your book. You're in the process of writing it now. I'm not sure quite where you are, but I know that you have a book deal with Penguin Random House, and the book, I think, is called The Happiest Moment of Your Life and is scheduled for publication hopefully early next year. Tell us, how did the book deal come together, and what are you hoping readers take away after reading the book?
Well, the book deal came totally by accident. I'm not an author by trade. I never pursued it. My now editor reached out to me when I was, multiple times while I was traveling. He had heard an interview I did on CNN, and he reached out and reached out again and reached out again. I thought it was spam because it was just John, signed John. I thought, well, this doesn't sound very, I got some emails like this before, kind of ignored it. I finally, looked the guy up, looked up his last name. I'm like, oh my goodness. Okay, this is the real deal. I shared a call with him. And it was a 2-hour long dialogue. I was in Israel just about to head into Palestine, and the war was going on. It was a very strange time to be talking about this, a book. And I didn't have it in my head I was actually kind of antagonistic towards the idea. And eventually he convinced me, I convinced myself, my family convinced me to try something new and challenge myself. And that's how it came to be. So I was actually on top of the Guinness World Record, on top of collecting the stories. I actually had to write 20 or 30 pages as proof that I could write while I was traveling and send that to him. And it was probably one of the longer deals that my agent had to ever put together in her career. She confided in me that, but it happened. And so, yeah, flash forward to January. What do I expect? What do I hope that the readers get out of it? Well, I hope they laugh. I hope maybe they're impacted emotionally. I hope that they're moved. I hope they maybe learn something, mostly about themselves. I kind of see it as a bit of a mirror. I mean, they're stories. They're all stories of other people. There's some of my words and some of others. More than just a travel log, and there's plenty of those. This is a lot of stories about other people, other people's happiness. I hope that other people are able to broaden the scope of what they view happiness to be in their life right now. And if you have a healthy view, or you think you have a healthy view of happiness right here, right now, that's great. That's perhaps more than some people have. But by reading other people's stories, you may see your own life's experiences, your own way of editing your life differently. That maybe is my deepest desire for upcoming readers.
Well, we'll look forward to that being released. And you said it's January next year, so we'll definitely look for that. Michael, you've had the rare opportunity to experience something that very few people ever will. Or 600 or 700 people have to date. Others will, but really very few compared to the world population, traveling to all 195 sovereign nations. And that kind of journey inevitably changes you. And it also gives you a unique perspective to share with others. And hopefully we'll get some of that in the book as well. If everyone listening to or watching this show could visit just 3 countries to expand their worldview, where would you send them, and why would you choose those 3?
That is a very good alternative to asking my favorite question. I appreciate that, Brian. I think that there are a lot of countries I could suggest based off of people's taste about where they should visit, but I think it's a lot more interesting to be challenged when you travel. I know that's not what everybody travels for. They don't travel to be challenged, to look outside of themselves. But I would send them to countries that are extremely isolated, perhaps under the international poverty line. That would be perhaps one. I mean, there are several I could say around the world, like Honduras, like Burundi or Malawi, like Guinea-Bissau. These are countries where you will experience culture shock at its fullest. Timor-Leste. So, selecting for perhaps countries where we do not have the spoils of riches. They do not have the spoils of riches that we do. I would also suggest going to countries, and this again might not be everybody's cup of tea, but is on the list of maybe travel advisories. Now, maybe not it's travel advisory 4, but maybe it's travel advisory 3. going with a great tour company. I can recommend Untamed Borders. These are countries that are portrayed in a certain way in media and pop culture that when you arrive, you'll realize is very, very different than the hegemonic narrative that we are typically provided. There are reasons why some countries can be at some times dangerous, and that's why it's important. If you have family, if you have loved ones, and all that. I mean, it's important to be prepared, but you go with the right people. You plan ahead. You will meet people with generosity beyond your wildest dreams, people who are willing to give everything when they have so little. And those are countries like perhaps Afghanistan or Pakistan, or I could suggest maybe Syria, or, I mean, maybe not right now, but Venezuela. And, the list can go on there. Finally, some countries, I like the idea of going to a country that you've never even heard of. Just you look at a list and you're like, I did not even know that was a country. Don't learn too much about it. I think just go in with enough safety to know that you will be safe. You want to know what kind of visas you need and how to get in legally, what you need to pack for what kind of weather, this sort of thing. But go to a country you haven't heard of and learn about it through the locals' perspective, through local eyes. That's a really exciting thing to me. Maybe I'm just a different kind of traveler, but I can't really tell you what country that might be. For the listeners, they may have their own versions. For me, I didn't know what Nauru was. Didn't know it was a country. I didn't know about Comoros. Let's see, Lesotho turned out to be one of my favorites. So, I mean, I guess I'll leave that up to your listeners.
I love the thoughtfulness that you put into answering that question. And I accept that challenge and hold me accountable to that. I will report back to you on each of those 3 visits, and hopefully there will be more than just 3 visits, but within each of those 3 categories. And I really appreciate you sharing that. Michael, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you sharing your incredible adventure with us. We could talk for hours and probably days about everything that you experienced, but I appreciate you giving us just a glimpse into that. And I really look forward to reading your book when it comes out.
Well, thank you, Brian. I've had a lot of interviews. I had a lot of press, but it is rarer to have people put together such thoughtful and interesting questions. It was a great conversation, really meaningful. And I didn't point this out, but I love the little touch right there of me holding the Guinness World Records, which are actually right on my wall right now. That's a nice customization. You get bonus points for that.
Well, I'm glad you caught it. Thanks for pointing it out, and we're happy to do it. That was just a small way to honor you and honor you coming on the show. Thanks again for everything, Michael.
My pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into Life Excellence. Please support the show by subscribing, sharing it with others, posting about today's show with Michael Zervos on social media, and leaving a rating and review. You can also learn more about me at brianbartes.com. Until next time, dream big dreams and make each day your masterpiece.